Hello fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I am excited to share my 9 favorite books that I read in the year of 2019. These yearly videos are some of my favorites to film, and I just love reflecting on everything that I read in a year and picking out books that I want to talk more about with you and maybe convince you to read or hear your thoughts on them if you've read them before. So let's get on to the books. The first book on this list is actually one of the first books that I read in 2019, and that is The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gowar. By the way, this list isn't ranked, it's just loosely in the order that I read these books throughout the year. It's hard enough to select these books, let alone try to rank them. But anyway, The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock is a sensational historical fiction novel that really raised the bar for what I expect from historical fiction. I actually talked about this book in a recent video of mine, but I love it, so I'm just going to rave about it again here. The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock takes place in 1785 and is about a merchant named Jonah Hancock, whose ship that he makes his livelihood with is sold unbeknownst to him. Instead, he is given a rare oddity, a mermaid. This creature is nothing like what you are imagining a mermaid to be. It's this small, grotesque corpse of a creature with fangs. Jonah is a practical and mercenary man, and he tries to make the best of his situation by displaying this curiosity to the public to make a living, and this brings him in contact with the highly renowned courtesan Angelica Neal, and the story just goes on from there. It's a captivating tale of the cost of ambition and interestingly examines the role of femininity and sexuality in society. The analogies between mermaids and female sexuality are brilliant, and the comparison between Jonah Hancock's showmanship of the mermaid to prostitution is elegantly executed. This book does have a touch of magical realism at the end, but the writing style actually mostly seems to take its inspiration from 19th century realist fiction. I fell in love with this book, and like I said, it really did raise my expectations for historical fiction. I actually did a whole review of this book last year when I read it, so if you are newer to my channel or you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, I highly recommend that you check out that video to hear more details about this fantastic book. The next 2 books are both by the same author, and that is because she has become a new favorite of mine, and that, of course, is Diane Setterfield. I like to say that the first book I ever read by her, The 13th Tale, is my favorite contemporary book of all time. And that is still true, I think. But Once Upon a River and Bellman in Black, both of which I read this year, are also absolutely amazing, and so they make this list. I actually received both of these books for Christmas because I love them so much, and you'll see that this video turns into a bit of a Christmas book haul as well. But anyway, Once Upon a River is about an ancient inn on the River Thames where the regulars pride themselves on their passion for storytelling. One night, the regulars find themselves in the midst of a story all their own. The door bursts open and in comes an injured stranger with the drowned corpse of a little girl. Everyone agrees that she's dead, but hours later the girl breathes and lives. The various characters in the book work to solve the mystery of how this is even possible. Who is this girl? Where did she come from? And is this a miracle? Is it magic? Can it be explained by science? This book is part fairy tale, part folklore, part historical fiction, and entirely wonderful. You are sucked into Setterfield's prose, and the story meanders through snippets of the characters' lives and their backstories, mimicking the natural flow of the River Thames itself. There are all these different characters and threads of stories. There's a cozy farming family, a photographer, the innkeeper, the regulars at the inn, a midwife, and all of their stories seem distinct and like they'll never come together, but eventually they coalesce into a beautiful and cohesive story. And that's the true magic of this book. It's structured like the river with all of these different sources and threads to fuel and add magnitude to the story. Reading it, you have no idea where it's going, but I promise that it does reach a destination in the end. And rather than thinking about the main plot of the book and what will happen and how all of these stories come together, there's a certain sense of wonder in simply allowing yourself to watch it unfold and to become wrapped in each individual story and in Setterfield's brilliant writing. Just thinking about this book makes me want to read it again, and now I own a copy, so I really can. And then there is Bellman in Black. Bellman in Black follows the character of William Bellman, who in his boyhood aims a slingshot at a rook and kills the bird instantly. The book follows Bellman's life and examines how this careless boyhood act informs his future. It looks at grief and work in such interesting ways, and even though so many of the characters die, as a reader you somehow move on and get over it. The deaths are given their proper due attention and are meaningful, but just like the main character, we find the strength to simply move on. Either because of or in spite of all of the death that surrounds William Bellman, he throws himself into his work. And so the book looks at the role of work in one's life, the importance of work, and of finding a balance in one's personal life. Setterfield manages to turn what is a rather ordinary man's story into something more interesting and definitely worth reading. And in true Setterfield style, there is a hint of the mythical or the supernatural thrown into the mix. I don't usually like books that are marketed as magical realism, and in fact, it's a buzzword that I try to stay away from in my literature, but books that have just the right amount of magical realism, like all of Diane Setterfield's works and The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock, are perfect for me. Actually, The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock might have had a touch too much magical realism for me at the end, but Diane Setterfield always hits that balance just perfectly. I also love the ambiguity of the character of Black in Bellman in Black. It's not entirely clear who he is. Is he the figment of Bellman's imagination? Is he grief itself? Is he the ghost of the rook he kills when he's young? Is it the ghost of his first experience with death? It's up to our interpretation, and I love that some of those interpretations read as quite supernatural, and some of them can be easily explained away with realism. And there are so many characters to love in this book, and the way they interact with and relate to Bellman is fascinating. I particularly like his daughter, Dora, and the way that grief combined with Bellman's obsession with work has distanced their relationship. And of course, it's Diane Setterfield, so this book is impeccably written. Something else that I find so special about Diane Setterfield's books are actually their covers, and I don't know how much control that Diane Setterfield has over this, but I find that her covers do the most fantastic job of reflecting the plot and symbolism and importance of her books. Like, take the 13th Tale, for example. This 13th Tale cover does the best job of showing you the plot twist on the front and the back. It has it very clearly displayed on here, but it's not something you'd ever know unless you read the book. Like, I don't think I'm showing you any spoilers by making you look at the cover right now. And this Bellman in Black cover isn't my favorite. My favorite one only comes in hardback, and I didn't want to own the hardback, but that cover reflects a very specific passage about the beauty, darkness, and the hidden iridescence of the rook's feathers. And then the Once Upon a River cover is so brilliant. All of the covers of Once Upon a River are brilliant. They reflect the River Thames and the importance that that plays in the book, both structurally and setting-wise. And the hardback even has a swan's neck in the shape of a river, which reflects the title of the inn in the book. So Diane Setterfield is brilliant, and I am very, very lucky to now own a copy of each of her books. The next book on this favorites list is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I actually saw Madeline Miller speak at the Brooklyn Book Festival last year, or the year before. She was so insightful and so well spoken that I wanted to read one of her books, and this book did not disappoint me. It took me on an emotional adventure full of all of the ingredients that can be found in the Greek epic of Homer. The Song of Achilles is a retelling of the legend of Achilles and the Trojan War. It takes place in ancient Greece and centers on Patroclus, an awkward prince who's been exiled from his kingdom to live with King Peleus and his perfect son Achilles. As Achilles and Patroclus grow up together, learning the art of war, their relationship develops and they become inseparable. We see Achilles through Patroclus' eyes and learn not just of the famous and brutal warrior, but about Achilles' softer side, his godlike beauty and his ability and passion for playing the lyre, and the tenderness that he shows towards Patroclus. This book is about legacy and the price to pay for ensuring a reputation of fame and heroism. It's about Achilles' struggle between mortal and God, and how his birth and his prophecy influence who he is as a person and informs the actions that he chooses to take. Madeline Miller writes beautifully and conveys a convincing relationship between these two men. It's clear that she's an expert in the source material of the classics, even if I'm not, and I can't wait to read more by her soon. I've heard mixed reviews of her newer release, Circe, but I think I'd still like a chance to read it at some point. Another favorite of mine for 2019 is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. This book centers on 17-year-old Cassandra Mortman, who lives in a ruined castle in the 1930s. Through her notebook, she tells us all about her life and her eccentric family. Her father is a literary genius who is trying to recreate his initial success, but suffers from writer's block. Her stepmother, Topaz, is an artist's model who enjoys communing with nature in nothing but boots. And then there's her somewhat pretentious older sister, Rose. The family struggles on in genteel poverty until they meet and socialize with their new landlords, the Cotton Brothers. This is just such a charming and quirky, warm book. It has a vivacious and readable writing style that sucks you in completely. I remember that I didn't care for the ending of this book initially. In fact, I went back and read what I initially wrote about this book in my little reading journal, and it was quite harsh, actually. I even said that the ending clouded my love for this book, but it seems like with time that is no longer true at all. I remember disliking the ending, but what actually remains with me from this book is the brilliant characterization, Cassandra's spunk and her writing style, and its overwhelming charm and quirkiness. I look at it on my shelves quite fondly and quite often, and I highly, highly recommend that you read it. The next book on this list is The Bedlam Stacks by Natasha Pulley. Natasha Pulley is becoming one of my favorite authors, and I absolutely loved her other book, The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, but I think I liked this one even more. I love Natasha Pulley's books so much that I received them both for Christmas as well. But anyway, The Bedlam Stacks takes place in 1859 and is about Merrick Tremaine, who used to work for the East India Company. He's stuck at home in Cornwall after injuring his leg, and there's nothing for him in his hometown. His brother has threatened him with being sent to an insane asylum or taking up a position as a parson, and of course Merrick is not thrilled with either option, so when the India office comes to recruit him for what really sounds like a suicide mission, he agrees against his better judgment to go. He's supposed to go to Peru and smuggle samples of a special type of tree that can produce a high yield of quinine, which is the treatment for malaria. Everyone who has previously attempted this mission has died, and Merrick still has a limp. But off he goes to Peru, where he meets a priest named Raphael, who's at the center of all of these stories and rumors of disappearances and cursed forests and living stones. This is such a brilliant book. It has a complex set of characters, an engaging plot, and the perfect balance of folklore and realism that I was discussing earlier. This book has themes of friendship, love, duty. It discusses imperialism and portrays a fascinating clash of cultures. It also touches on themes of disability in the Victorian era and looks at disability's relationship to religion and God. This book is absolutely brilliant, and I cannot highly recommend it enough. Though you might want to start with Natasha Pulley's first book, The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, because some of the characters do overlap slightly in this one. Natasha Pulley is coming out with a third book in 2020 very soon, and I cannot wait. I'm already on the wait list at my local library for a copy of The Lost Future of Pepper Harrow. The next book is one that I feel like I'll be seeing on a lot of people's Best of 2019 lists, and that is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book is a documentary of a fictional band in the 60s and 70s, and it explores the backgrounds and the relationships of the various band members, their rise to fame, and just the general sex, drugs, and rock and roll culture that was prevalent at the time period. I listened to this as a full cast audiobook, and it was wonderful. I wouldn't have read it any other way. I feel like this book was meant to be spoken. It was hard for me to believe that this wasn't a real band because the voices were so well done. The voice actors did a really great job, but Taylor Jenkins Reid also wrote such unique and captivating voices for each of the characters. The band is apparently loosely based off of Fleetwood Mac and Stevie Nicks, but the characters are all their own, and the trajectories take such different turns from Fleetwood Mac's band members. The characters and the relationships with each other feel so real and have this magnetic energy that makes you want to know what happens to them and makes them feel like a real band and real people. And it sounds silly, but I found myself falling in love with their music based on the descriptions alone, even though the songs don't actually exist, apart from select lyrics and song titles that Taylor Jenkins Reid made up. It's almost as if not being able to hear the songs makes you appreciate them even more. I also really liked the feminist bent to this story. Each of the female characters in this book at some point had to face sexism in the industry and overcame it in their own ways. They each managed to carve a space for their own desires amidst the male-dominated industry and even in their personal lives. It was refreshing to hear them discuss that aspect of their experiences. This book was so delightful and so different from anything I've ever read before. It also makes me want to check out Taylor Jenkins Reid's first book, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, even though I heard it wasn't quite as good as Daisy Jones. The next book on this list is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. This book is the coming-of-age story of Jim Hawkins, the innkeeper's son of a rural inn on the West English coast called the Admiral Benbow. Jim's life is changed forever when he bonds with an unusual guest at the inn who is an old sailor named Billy Bones. His relationship with Billy Bones gets Jim mixed up in a quest for the long-lost treasure of the infamous pirate Captain Flint. It's a classic adventure story full of pirates, mutinies, and the promise of treasure. Many of the stereotypical images of pirates stem from this book. Treasure maps where X marks the spot, one-legged seamen with a parrot on their shoulder, the quintessential pirate Long John Silver, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. It is all in this book. But what you might not expect to be in this book is a fascinating exploration of Victorian respectability, morality, and class. As Jim interacts with pirates, criminals, and outlaws of the English crown, he has to decide for himself what is right and what true Victorian morality is all about. I think that this is a spectacular book, and I can't believe that I never read it before. It's so fun to get swept up in this whirlwind adventure, but also to think about it in the context of the Victorian era. And speaking of the Victorian era, last but not least is the only nonfiction book on this list, and that is How to Be a Victorian by Ruth Goodman. If you have any interest in the Victorian era, you must read this book. It goes through a day in the life of a Victorian person from dawn to dusk, and everything he or she might have done. It talks about the kinds of things that aren't explicitly mentioned in the novels we read, because they're common knowledge of the time period. Things like bathing and brushing your teeth, going to the bathroom, and what types of clothes one might wear, what Victorian schools were like, what they ate, attitudes on sex and sports and medicine, and so much more. Ruth Goodman is quite the expert, since she not only studied and researched all about living in the Victorian era, but she did live as a Victorian for periods of time. This book is filled with rich details of the time period, as well as Ruth Goodman's modern perspective of her experiences living like a Victorian. Her love and respect for history shines through in this book, and if we can't time travel to spend a day in Victorian England, then reading this is the next best thing. I think I'll mention some more specifics of what I learned from this book in my December wrap-up, which, yes, I still have to make. The holidays and New Year's just come so quickly and happen all at once. I never really know when to make my December wrap-up, and rest assured, it is coming at some point in January, but I'm always so excited to make this best of 2019 video that I wanted to do this first, and the December wrap-up just gets pushed down the list. So anyway, those were my favorite 9 books of 2019. I hope you had a fantastic reading year in 2019. Did you read any of these books? And if so, what did you think of them? Were they your favorites too? And if you haven't read them yet, are there any that I mentioned in this video that you can't wait to get to? Maybe they'll make your best of 2020 list. I'd be curious to know what your favorite books of 2019 were as well. So Thank you all for watching, and until next time, I look forward to seeing you in another video very soon. Bye!